Viewers, today's exercise was a budget with vision for the next 25 years, not just for this financial year, says the finance minister as she presented her fourth budget. The Modi government estimates that India's economic growth at 9.2% will be the highest among all large economies. It is basing its estimates on a massive 35.4% hike in capital expenditure, which is 2.9% of the GDP. Most of the money is to be pumped into the PM Gati Shakti master plan, which is firing on 7 engines. This is what the finance minister said in her budget speech. Additionally, the centre hopes that 60 lakh new jobs will be created under the productivity-linked incentive scheme in 14 sectors. In fact, the government believes that PLI schemes have the potential to create an additional production of rupees 30 lakh crores. In this way, the Prime Minister says the nation will enter the phase of Amrit Kal, powered by growth along 4 priorities: PM Gati Shakti, inclusive development, productivity enhancement and investment, sunrise opportunities, energy transition, waterways and logistical infrastructure. It's very ambitious, but viewers, it promises results, growth, jobs and a boost to consumption. Let's throw this open, viewers. We have a number of experts today and we can go straight to them. Nainalal Kidwai, past president of FICCI and chair India Sanitation Coalition with us. So is Dr. Aparajita Sarangi, national spokesperson and MP of the BJP. Let me first begin with you, Ms. Kidwai. How do you see the pronouncements that have been made in this budget? Is it growth orientated or has it left you underwhelmed?
Well, it's definitely growth oriented. You see the capex numbers, that is all about growth. 35% increase on already large budget for this year, the current year, is clear indication. I think the growth orientation, if you look at some of the conversations we were having before the budget, had to also come from jobs and consumption and demand to help really ensure that capacity utilization in industry went up. And here the numbers are sort of buried in the budget. I do believe that we have a lot of job creation there, but NREGA, for example, is down 25%. Now, to make up for it, where does it happen? Infrastructure spending, not all of it is intensely job creating. Mechanization and road building does not maybe lead to quite the same degree of job creation as, say, something in sanitation. And I can give you an example that what has been set aside is 67,000 crores for the Swachh Bharat mission, Grameen, and for Swachh Bharat mission, Jal Jeevan mission. 67,000 crores, and the job creation there is huge. A study by UNICEF for the 5 years 2014 to 2019 showed that 75 lakh new jobs were created. This is an external agency reaffirming job creation through public goods delivery of programs such as Swachh Bharat. So programs like this will carry forward the employment agenda. So I don't think we should worry that NREGA is down, but let's look at capital expenditure going forward, also being in similar programs which are job creating. And every program we have to make sure that we can look at it through the lens of job creation and demand creation.
Okay. Anil Desai, Member of Parliament of the Shiv Sena. Mr. Desai, the opposition hasn't been very kind to the finance minister. Are you one of those who believes that she hasn't done enough?
This budget which has been presented by Honorable Finance Minister has drawn a very rosy picture if I say it in my words, I mean, it will be taken that opposition means only opposition, because considering, but you can't deny the fact that few states, very crucial states, are going for elections. Some of them are in the first, second phase in UP and other states also. Important states, and down the line in the year by December, many more are coming up. So this budget itself has not given anything in practical, but drew a picture which gives a common man a hope that yes, something would emerge in near future, which will be beneficial as far as his needs and wants are concerned. But overall, these things have been happening for quite some years, and nothing has come. If you take the point of creation of jobs, 60 lakh jobs, I mean, just go by the figures on the yesteryear's promises which have been made in the budget speeches, and what has culminated or what has come to the fore. See, going for the projects, going for the public expenditure or capital expenditure or infrastructural projects, and creating jobs, what is being shown, that is never of a permanent nature. And what kind of economy we have gone through. Of course, I mean, Corona pandemic has really broken through our entire resources, but the government which is needed, that at this moment they should have come out with a huge public expenditure where spending capacity, people would have something to spend and earn their livelihood, was of very much of essence. You take a case of middle class, you take case of farmer community, you take case of every factor that is in
so
the
you're
society.
saying most sectors,
what they have got in the budget is a big question.
It's a big question. Okay. Dr. Sarangi, how do you respond to the Shiv Sena MP today?
A very good evening. I think all 135 crore Indians today would be thanking Honorable Prime Minister and his team for this particular budget, which is extremely pragmatic in nature, which is extremely balanced, and which beautifully conveys the vision of the government. India at 75 and India at 100. And I think today everyone understands what is Atmanirbhar Bharat and how do we achieve that Atmanirbharta. This particular budget 22-23 is focused on infrastructure, growth, investment, and of course it talks of 60 lakh jobs for the youth. No sector has been left untouched, if I can say, and I would call it a budget in continuity. Now, this budget, you cannot delink from the budget of, say, 21-22 or 2021. You know, this is all in continuity. We are talking of a host of schemes, a host of programs which should be implemented very well. A very important aspect of this particular budget is the talk of additional 1 lakh crore funding to the states in the spirit of cooperative federalism. In fact, this explains, I said earlier, this conveys beautifully the vision of the Honorable Prime Minister and his entire team. We are also talking of the deprived and the needy. 80 lakh Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana houses would be constructed both in urban and rural areas with an outlay of rupees 48,000 crore. Rupees 1,500 crore has been earmarked for the development of the 8 northeastern states. And when we talk of focus on infrastructure, we talk of roads, we talk of railways, we are talking about 25,000 crore, 25,000 kilometer NH roads. We are talking about 2,000 kilometer of rail network, which would be brought under Kavach. So I think we are all talking of overall development of all the sectors, the holistic development of all the sectors. Har ghar nal se jal. This is extremely important. You know, 3.8 crore households would be covered in 2022-23 with an investment of rupees 60,000 crore, and 100% of the post offices in the country, I think 1.5 lakh post offices in the country, will be covered under the core banking services system. So I think this particular budget needs commendation, and the entire team deserves applause for whatever hard work that has been put into it. Everybody's concerns has been taken care of. You talk about the sectors, and if you compare the revised estimate of many of the major departments, many of the major ministries with the budget estimate of 22-23, the RE of 21-22,
well, if it is a budget in continuity,
budget estimate
Ms. Sarangi,
the of 22-23,
if it is
would be extremely happy to know.
If it is a budget in continuity, how can you guarantee job creation? Because there have been promises made, numbers and targets have been set, And if you just look at the CMI data, the unemployment rate touched 7.9%, a 4-month high just in December. And we're talking about the period, when we were seeing the effects of the second wave waning. So why should we believe that this is going to usher in an Amrit Ka Mahotsav or an Amrit Kal, so to speak?
Today, Honorable Finance Minister Madam Nirmala Sitharaman started her speech with the statement that the GDP growth rate would be 9.2% in the coming year.
Okay.
And this is one of the highest if we compare our economy with the economies of our sized nations. So I think this is enough to indicate that there would be growth in all the sectors. Unless and until there is growth in all the sectors, the GDP growth rate would not be 9.2%.
Okay, so they're quoting the GDP numbers, viewers.
14 sectors.
Okay, overall GDP numbers. You can't have a top line like that without all sectors of the economy being covered. Kalikesh Singh Dio, do you believe perhaps today the opposition is being political in its attack on the budget? It's not being, it is not taking its assessment from an economist's position.
The job of the opposition to criticize, and one should take the criticism in a constructive manner. But having said that, I actually think this budget is not bad at all. I think the finance minister had a tough space to work under. We've gone through one of the worst fiscal years in 2020-21. We've got inflation coming up. You've seen the global inflation happening. The trick to encourage growth and not create a hyper-inflated sort of economic scenario in India was indeed challenging. I mean, India's got better macroeconomic indicators. I like this budget for the simple fact that it's got a fairly large capex spend. Even though out of the 7.5 lakh crores, almost 50,000 crores goes to Air India disinvestment for its past dues. I like the fact that it's got a thrust on drinking water. That's something which we've sorely lacked in a country which wants to be a modern country in the 21st century. If we do not give drinking water, safe drinking water to our citizens, it's really falling short. What I don't like about the budget, though, and there are a few things, I mean, everything else is about balances, right? The budget doesn't address the demand side of consumption. I think if more could have been done on direct cash benefit transfer or other sort of systems where cash could actually be put in the hands of rural consumers, there we've seen rural distress to a large extent. I mean, in the lockdown, in the first and second lockdown, I myself bought back home almost 15,000 people to my constituency. There were construction workers all across the country. And that's something which is still, in my mind, left to be addressed. I don't see how large capex spends, like Nana was saying, could actually translate to large employment numbers on the ground. That's one. I still think agriculture is not being given its due. A lot more could have been done. You cannot. I mean, agriculture was what protected the Indian economy during the first lockdown. Between 2021, there was a demand generator, and now we have a lot of distress there. I also think that maybe some amount of generosity could have been displayed by the finance minister to the Indian middle class. Nothing has been done for the tax slabs rates. Okay. And that's just a first take on things.
Okay, let me just quickly bring in Mr. Alagh on this before I bring in Surjit Bhalla, the Executive Director of IMF for India, Bangladesh, Bhutan and Sri Lanka. We'll go out to him in just a few minutes. But I want to bring you in, Sunil Alagh. Has the finance minister, in her pursuit of prudence, perhaps, ignored the immediate needs of some of the classes of society? You know, the middle class, perhaps the peasantry. That's a recurrent theme that we're hearing. I think you're on mute, sir. You're on mute.
Mute. One second.
Yeah. I can hear you now. Yes. Go ahead.
Hear me now. Can you?
Yeah.
Okay.
We can hear you.
I'm just saying that, look, ultimately at the end of the day, it's a vision statement for the next 5 years, for the next 3 years. Results will come in the next, not 22, 23. It may be partially in 22, 23, but it will come in 23, 24. Whilst a number of people have said, talked about demand generation, very little has been done in that area because most of the private companies, you've got the public sector putting in a lot of capex, But how do you get the private sector to put in capex is when they will see demand for their products. Almost all FMCG products are saying that they've gone in higher on value but lower on volume. In fact, many of them have been quite static. So unless they see a demand generation, they are not going to put in new factories. They're not going to give new employment. They're not going to carry on. So that is one area for me which is going to be very important. And there's very little done in the area of demand. They've stuck to the supply side for the last 3 years. And I was hoping they'd bring about some balance by putting in on the demand side this time. But look, the middle class, the lower middle class, I was expecting not a complete change in slabs of income tax because you cannot give it all throughout. But the lower end could have been given some money. And the question of 1.7 lakh crores on disinvestment was the target. And all they've achieved is 8 to 10%. Anybody in the private sector would have got sacked for that. Look, I mean, where is the money? Where is the question of putting a target for 1 year and and achieving only 10%? Because nobody in the private sector would have got that kind of leeway, which the government is giving and everybody else. So look, there's a lot of money in the system. They've done a damn good budget. If you ask me, the vision has been laid out. For me, normally a budget is 75% of what is going to happen in that 1 year, and 25% relates to vision. Here they've gone in reverse. 75% look for the future. We are going to build roads. And road building and all that is going to bring in unskilled labor. What are you doing with skilled labor? Where is that going to come in this budget alone? And therefore, what I look forward to in budgets is that I'd give it 9 out of 10 on vision, on laying out the path for 5 years, on doing 3 years, on laying out, putting housing, everything is there if you touch every sector. But the two areas which are most important for me are inflation. Very little has been done in that area of controlling inflation. And that, but see, they've said $70 to $75 is the assumption on oil per barrel. It's $90 today. Once it comes in, then when you start paying 90 to 100, it's going to not only increase oil prices, but there's going to be a trickle-down effect.
Okay.
And therefore, how are you going to control it? The poor chap in the lower middle income group, as the previous panelist has said, look, it's a great budget, but in these two areas, they could have done a lot more. That's my view, but otherwise, that's it. It's a great budget, but very little is done on demand. Very little is done on inflation. And that assumption is all wrong in the assumption in the budget that it'll be around $70 to $75 in the coming year. It's already 90.
Okay,
That's
that point has been made
out.
all through the day today. It's an important one. Let's open this conversation out. I'm joined now by Surjit Bhalla, Executive Director, IMF for India, Bangladesh, Bhutan and Sri Lanka. Mr. Bhalla, thank you very much for speaking to me. How will this budget fuel both consumption and jobs? Is there a worry on the inflation front? Has that issue been addressed head-on in this particular budget? Consumption and demand, the other two.
Thank you. Look, I'll answer this in several fronts. First, most important, and I've been listening to your debates in other channels, etc. What has happened last year, the pandemic, is a universal phenomenon. So therefore, the only way we can assess any country's performance is relative to what other countries have done. Let us take, starting off with inflation. Now, India has one of the best records on inflation. The best. You look at Europe, you look at advanced countries, you look at Latin America, look at other Asian countries. So I don't understand when people say, what are these guys doing on inflation? Look at where the inflation is. If with this kind of a supply shock that has hit the world, I think it is a bit outlandish to say, what have you done on inflation? Now let's come to what is the other function of the budget and the policymakers. What are you doing for growth? We talk about demand, we talk about supply. Ultimately, it's growth, it's welfare, both for the top half of the distribution and the bottom half of the distribution. In the aggregate terms, India is now, first of all, you must have noticed that the GDP growth decline last year has been reduced by 1 percentage point. So second, The growth this year, that is 21-22, is 9%, the highest amongst major economies. The growth next year is the highest amongst major economies. The growth 3 years from now is the highest amongst major economies. So, what are we trying to complain about? Now, let me come to the welfare side. Look, I've been following budgets for a very, very long time. And the slogan in India has been, I begin in the name of the poor. What this budget has done has shown, and actually not just this budget, the actions over the last 5 years have shown that this government is about action, not words. We have seen in the name of the poor programs in action, in delivery, not in words and platitudes. So I think if you look at whether the poor have benefited, whether economic growth has there, and by poor, I really mean the bottom 50%, have benefited. What about growth? What about infrastructure? Infrastructure lays the foundation for growth. So we are taking care of demand, the work, etc. Right now, demand is not there. We've got housing delivery, we've got food grain delivery, etc. for the bottom 50%. So I am at loss to understand when people say, what have we done on inflation? What have we done on demand? What have we done on growth? What are we expecting? Last year it was, we declined the highest amounts in the world. And actually it turns out that we did quite well compared to a lot of the major economies. And the ones that we didn't do that well with, in East Asia, etc., we're doing better now. So take a 2-year record, 3-year record, 4-year record. We are doing actually exceptionally well in comparative terms. You can't look at development. You can't look at growth in absolute terms. It always has to be relative because, hang on, we are in a globalized world. It's no longer, people are talking as if 30, 40 years ago, we are a closed economy, the only economy, and whatever happens in the rest of the world doesn't. How can people say, look at oil. Oil is affecting us, oil is affecting others. How have you done with this shock? So that's my 2 bits of word at the beginning.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the criticism which has been more pointed. P. Chidambaram, can you hear me? P. Chidambaram has underlined that per capita income has declined from 1 lakh in 2019-2020 to 1 lakh 8,000 to 1 lakh 7,801 in 21-22, which is less, while per capita expenditure declined from 62,056 in 2019-2020 to rupees 59,043 in 21-22.
Yeah.
Now, while the FM may have kept the income tax rate unchanged, do you think this should be enough to boost demand in the economy, especially amidst high inflation?
Look, we can go through and put in all these numbers, etc. When we want to obfuscate, we go through a lot of numbers so nobody can really follow. The simple fact is, let's look at per capita income. That's the conceptual point. Per capita income declined by something like 7% last year. Per capita income this year is going to go up by something like 9%. Okay, make it 8.5, take care of population growth of 1%. So therefore, over a year, no point comparing the pandemic, the worst record year for the world economy, much bigger shock than the global financial crisis, which Mr. Chidambaram faced when in 2008-9. This is a bigger shock. So what are we saying? I mean, we're saying that in 2 years, we have recovered higher per capita income this year. And now let's look at what's going to happen in the future. Again, I come back to what I just said earlier. You cannot look at this in isolation and throw out numbers and accept that people will now say, oh, yes, per capita income has declined. Everywhere it's declined. Where hasn't it declined?
No, but the expectation was, therefore, fair enough, it's declined everywhere. It's declined also here in India, and there has been a sharp fall, and the statistics are there. So I want to ask you, why couldn't money have been put directly? And that's, you know, the consistent criticism since the morning. You've cut back on subsidies across various classes, and that's going to hurt.
Look, who does it hurt the most? We really want our concern with the bottom 50% of the population. Now, food for the extreme poor, make it 10, 15, 20% of the population, is the most important item. They have doubled the delivery of food to the poorest. Actually, it also, I shouldn't say to the poorest, it also applies to something like 2/3 of the population is eligible for the food rations. One nation, one card, delivery, better targeting, less leakage, less corruption. And I'm not even going into what the effects of Narega, housing, chulas, etc. are for the bottom 50%. So, you know, it's been cushioned. And studies are being done, I'm involved in one of them, to show that after adjusting for these transfers, the poor are actually no worse off than they were before. And in any case, the poverty level in India, the extreme poverty level, the so-called $1.9 a day poverty line, is down to less than 2% after the pandemic, okay? Because of the lot of delivery to the poor in terms of food rations, etc. So, you know, the shock is a shock. The decline is a decline in aggregate terms. Yes, the rich have lost more. That's where we show, or even the middle class has lost relative to the poor, but the middle class is 80th percentile. So therefore, the top 20% have lost relative to what happened before.
Well, that's something that the opposition again disagrees with. Again, P. Chidambaram, the former finance minister, says that the FM is betting on heavy market borrowing, increase in corporate tax collections, personal income tax and GST. There's not a word about raising more resources from the rich, especially the very, very rich 142 persons whose wealth in the last 2 years has increased from 23 lakh 14,000 crore to 53 lakh 16,000 crores. How would you respond to this?
Look what has happened at the ground level, okay? And I personally think this is a well thought out, well conceived, both budget and, as Sunil was saying, vision. This is a plan for the present and for the future, and well conceived, well thought out. I think, you know, there are lots of people arguing for there should be a tax on the wealthy, this, that. This is all very fashionable. And you will see various articles around the world. And let me ask you, which country has gone ahead and done it? Especially when you're coming out of a pandemic. You cannot have it both ways. You cannot say that, listen, the pandemic has really hurt everybody, and now say, now I'm going to hurt growth by increasing taxation and by soaking the rich. We have tried so many times to sock it to the rich, and really we didn't end up socking to the rich. So therefore, what counts is what is effective. What counts is delivery. What counts is infrastructure. And everybody has to work towards that. We already have last year, 2 years ago, Mr. Chidambaram and others were saying the surtax was too high, the middle class was hurting, etc. Now we are saying, oh, we didn't do any increase in taxes. Now you're saying you should have done an increase in tax rates. So I don't know, you know, it really depends what position you are from, what political position you have, and what political ideology you have. So
well, let me tell you, if you were to tax the rich and perhaps give the middle class a bit of a break, I'm just saying, maybe you would have more collections, and you would be able to close the fiscal deficit gap to within 1 to 1.5% of the budget estimate. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, certain problems with Surjit Bhalla's audio there. Basically, viewers, it's all coming down to...
What you said.
Yeah, we're just going to connect you again. We're coming... I think you can hear me now. You can hear me now. Well, Surjit Bhalla, look, if you were to tax the rich or the super rich or what have you, and give the middle class a bit of a tax break, surely you'll be able to collect more revenue, which will help you close within 1 to 1.5% the fiscal deficit of GDP. That's another calculation that is being made.
Look, let's look at the tax situation correctly and tax revenue collection.
Okay.
India has had one of the most spectacular 2 years of recovery in tax collection, never before achieved in India. Remember, this is in a decline. We showed the highest improvement, a 30% annualized growth in taxes, in corporate taxes, in income taxes, in GST, in excise taxes. So the tax situation is really good. So we should be congratulating the government for collecting so much revenue with so little income. Previously, you had inflation of 12, 14, 15%, and then you collected your taxes, and they were inflation taxes. Here you are genuinely getting good revenue, good collection, increased compliance, which no previous government in India had achieved. This is a remarkable story, needs a lot more emphasis than what is being given. The tax story and the expenditure story in India is the most remarkable I have seen ever. And mind you, again, since I believe in a comparative picture compared to what other countries have done, and we come out looking really, really good in terms of export growth, looking really, really good in terms of tax revenues, looking really, really good in terms of GDP growth. So quibble about something else. Don't quibble about success.
Okay. Don't quibble about success. If it's working, don't try to fix it. Thank you very much, Mr. Bhalla, for that perspective. I'm going to now go straight across to Padmaja Joshi, who has with her the captains of Indian industry. They're going to assess the budget.
All right, so the big business roundtable, we have Sunil Kant Munjal, chairman at Hero Enterprises, joining us along with Dr. Naushad Forbes, the co-chairman at Forbes Marshall Private Limited, and R. Mukundan, CEO and MD of Tata Chemicals. I'll start with you first, Mr. Munjal. Your one big takeaway, because the uniform feeling right now is that for an election budget, everyone is flummoxed about why there is no big bang. What for you is the biggest takeaway?
So while this was the Nirmala Sitharaman's shortest speech, she also announced the biggest ever spend of capex in India on any budget, by the way. So it is a big bang. I don't know what people expect in a big bang. I also like that she focused on digital technologies across the board, healthcare system, on the education system, on creating land records across the country, digital currency. Actually, there's a whole lot of things bringing technology into play for ease of business and ease of life. The third thing I liked was that she spoke about improving the federal structure by getting the states as partners in implementation. Because please remember, implementation, it's all about execution. No matter what you announce, and execution has to be on the ground, which is in the states. So whether it's the new SEZ policy or it's giving a 1 lakh crore additional allocation, interest-free loans, there are 3 or 4 different things, or the one station, one product program. I think there is directionally some very, very powerful stuff in there. I know people had expected, were disappointed with not getting additional exemptions on income tax for the middle class or salary class.
But isn't that disappointment justified, Naushad Forbes? Because you've had record GST collection. If you have the leeway and you can increase consumption, then why not?
Well, if you look at people who've really been affected and hit in this last 2 years, it's actually not people who pay income tax. It's people who it's the informal labor in the urban sector. They're the ones who've been the hardest hit. It's to some degree rural employment. So it's not really been people who pay taxes who've been the most affected in these last 2 years. So I'm not sure that there's actually a case for further tax exemptions, etc. I also think there was a lot of merit in being consistent in tax policy, consistent in the programs that had been announced earlier, like the Gati Shakti program with a lot more detail this time, consistency in privatization. I think that consistency message is a powerful and useful message, and I see it as a positive.
But when we talk about a consistent budget, a continuation from what we had seen last year, can it also be interpreted, Mr. Mukundan, as a status quo budget, where you're not taking too many risks?
In fact, I would not call it status quo budget. I think fundamentally resisting the temptation of raising taxes, holding them constant, simplification of the tax administration regime with respect to litigation, I think is a very positive move. Also, use of digital to actually improve tax administration is a very, very positive move. I think what has really stood out for me in this budget is the increased thrust on infrastructure. 30-35% increase in infrastructure spending, taking it to 10 lakh crores, I think is a massive jump. Then the focus on sustainability. You saw this whole thing about green, the energy, greening of energy, sustainability, which is coming all the way through the budget. Also the focus on urbanization. They want to reimagine urbanization for the first time. As India starts to improve its productivity, more and more people are going to come to cities. We have to reimagine our cities. And the focus on logistics to improve efficiency through Gati Shakti. These are all real positive steps. And I think there's continuity also with respect to MSME support. I think not much was withdrawn. They continued with the support. And fundamentally, what the whole thing was, the government's message was that till the private sector investment picks up, they want to spend their money in public sector investment. That was the whole message I thought in this budget.
Well, you're rightly saying that there is a lot of focus on infrastructure development. Even in the lead up to elections, one of the major planks of the BJP has been that we are not just talking about populist schemes. We want there to be overall growth, and infrastructure is a part of that. But there are also cynics, Mr. Munjal, who say that a lot of these infrastructure schemes end up being a lot of hyperbole. You've got the smart city scheme, you've got the urban development scheme, where funds are allocated, but on ground, the development is not up to the mark.
You are right that all these announcements are always and only as good as their execution, which is a reality for any budget, any announcement that is ever made. But this is the starting point. This is where you have to start from. Make a big, bold plan and ensure that you have the capability of execution, and then measure outcomes, not only outlays. So that's the one thing that we in CII have been insisting now for many, many years. In fact, at one point in time, the government started saying, we will measure and announce outcomes, not just annually, but we will make a quarterly announcement of outcomes. Somewhere along the way, it kind of got lost. So you're right on that point. But to be fair to the government, please remember, the last 2 years has been amongst the toughest times any nation has ever seen on this planet, at least in living memory. So having come through in the manner we have, overall economy doing well as an average, but clearly there are sectors in the economy which are suffering. So we do need to ensure that those which are getting left behind, which are suffering, are given the support that is required. But you have to keep growing the size of the pie. The overall top end has to grow for the entire system to continue to benefit. So I think this touch at both ends is an important, and I think it's actually a smart technique.
Naushad Forbes, do you think there has been enough impetus given to the economy? Given that, everyone's talking about it as a booster dose, that we are going to kickstart our economy, inverted V, K. Is there enough of a stimulus to the economy?
Well, I think the number one way in which the government can and should stimulate the economy is by infrastructure spending, because that has the longest and biggest multiplier effect. It has a good immediate multiplier effect in creating employment, and it has a long-term multiplier effect in terms of giving you a more efficient economy overall with lower logistics costs and so on. So I think the infrastructure focus is exactly right. It's the way in which the economy should be stimulated. One thing that I would have liked to have seen greater attention paid to in the budget is actually integration with the world and exports. One of the areas where this government was consistent with the past, but I think unwelcomely consistent, was in protection. The tariffs were extended to the capital goods sector. I'm not sure that is in the long-term interest of the country. I think we are best served by a country that integrates with the world and which trades much more with the world. So I regret the continued focus on import tariffs and protection. If I can add one additional thing, I thought it was a very interesting scheme that was announced, a very interesting proposal, which was to take defense R&D spending and make it available. 25% of all defense R&D spending, I think, was the number mentioned, would now be open to participation by industry and by academia. That's a very potentially transformative step because that's the way the world does defense R&D. When most foreign governments fund R&D, they don't do it themselves. They do it in private industry. They do it in academia. We somewhat uniquely tended to do it in our own government autonomous laboratories, and that's both limited the outcome and also not been a good contribution to broader technical capabilities in the economy. So I think if that program really gets underway, it could be potentially very powerful. To me, it was the most interesting single new thing that I heard in this budget.
In fact, it's something that was highlighted by the Raksha Mantri as well, where he said this could be a transformative step as far as defense production in our country is concerned. But how would you weigh in, Mr. Mukundan, on the entire Make in India project, especially in the defense sector and in other sectors? The Prime Minister consistently with every budget has said that we need to be Atmanirbhar, we need to make sure that most of our acquisitions are domestic. How has it worked so far? And do you think that the budgetary provisions are helping in Atmanirbharta over the last 3 years at least?
So I think we have to look at it more from the point of a top-up to the investment gap, which may be their return gap, which the private sector must be feeling. That's the way it should be seen. It is not the entire investment, but it's going to be the top-up which makes the difference to enable the private sector to go and put the money. You've seen it already in the electronics sector. Massive investment. We are now even readying ourselves to put the wafers in here in India so that we can make the chips locally. So I think this is a big shift which has happened. India's biggest import today, actually other than oil import, is electronics. And we have to make that Atmanirbhar if you want to cut back on imports. And I think the thrust on electronics is something. In fact, one of the statements which Finance Minister said was wanting to move to new age from what was seen as a status quo old age industries. And I think this push towards new age, digital, electronics, I think is a consistent step that the government has maintained. I think we should be very supportive. Also, the PLI scheme has had many good takers. Many sectors are participating, but some sectors have given feedback on how it should be improved. I think this is a government which listens. So wherever we've pointed out areas of improvement, I think they are taking it on board.
But naturally, since we've spoken about becoming $1 trillion economy, we're talking about electronics. The natural comparison next, Mr. Munjal, would be with China, and that is the one neighbor we are constantly in competition with. If anything, since the last 2 years, despite the tension at our borders, the business that we are doing has gone up consistently. What are we doing in that direction, and what is there in this budget to help us push back against Chinese business and Chinese imports?
So there are 2 or 3 things. One, we have to realize that we cannot isolate ourselves from China. China is an important part of the global economy. And if we want to be a global player, you have to play with all who are in the field. And we must also realize that they have done a lot more than we have in terms of manufacturing and technology. They started 12 years ahead of us, and they actually move faster than us. So we have some work to do before we can start comparing ourselves directly. There is enough potential. I just want to go back to the earlier question you asked of Mukundan. please remember that most countries which manufacture and use high technology use defense as a foundation for actually building it. In many, many countries, whether you look at Japan or you look at US and a whole host of them. So I think it's a very smart move, especially as India is amongst the largest importers of defense in the world. On the one hand, you bring down your import bill. On the other, you build capabilities, and it's not used only for defense. Those capabilities are used across the board for all kinds of sectors, both in manufacturing and also in services. And I think that more than anything will help us to compete with countries across the globe, China being one of them, but not only China. We have to be careful and focus on all of those that we compete with, but we must also cooperate at the same time. So this is we have to build ourselves into a global player and a part of the global value chain.
All right, I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you very much, all gentlemen. It'll still take a bit more time to go through the fine print, but all in all, not a huge announcement, but a cautious and optimistic step forward seems to be the consensus right now. Thank you very much.